Today, I will be talking about 15 books that I'm excited for that are being released in January. There's going to be quite a variety of books on this list. I've kind of been debating on this channel whether I go deep or whether I go broad, and by that I mean, do I go really deep into like one particular subgenre and explore everything that has to offer, or do I go broad and read a little bit of everything? And at least for the first quarter of 2024, I've decided to embrace the chaos and just read a little bit of everything, like whatever catches my eye. So this list definitely reflects that. This is probably the most varied list I've had for the new books so far. So let me know what you think of this. I can go back to focusing more on, I guess, your traditional adult fantasy, but you know, we'll see. Whatever, I'm experimenting. I am going through these books in publication order. So the first book on my list today is being published January 2nd. This is a YA sci-fi dystopia that honestly kind of puts me in mind of like the books that were coming out right after the Hunger Games came out. But I'm hoping this will have its own take on the story. It also reminds me like very slightly of Red Rising. So I don't know, I'm like slightly curious about this one. Exiled to live as a low, 16-year-old Conrad refuses to become heir to his murderous uncle. But the meritocracy is a harsh and unforgiving rule on the floating island of Homestead. And when his ailing mother is killed by monstrous gargantuans, Conrad cuts a deal to save the only family he has left and to rescue his sister from his uncle's clutches. Conrad must enter the selection of the 12 trades. The next book on my list is The Storms We Made. This is one of, I think, 3 historical fiction books that made this list. I still am somewhat interested in historical fiction and they catch my eye, even though I don't always actually follow up and read them, and I don't always enjoy them whenever I do read them. But there's something about them that just intrigues me, and I want to give historical fiction more of a chance. In a spellbinding, sweeping novel about a Malayan mother who becomes an unlikely spy for the invading Japanese forces during World War II, and the shocking consequences that rain upon her and her community. The next book on my list is The Curse of Eelgrass Bog. This is a middle grade fantasy that I love the cover of, and it just looks like a good time. Dark secrets and unnatural magic abound when a 12-year-old girl ventures into the bog full of monsters to break a mysterious curse. Moving on to January 9th, we have the next book in the Wayward Children series. This is book 9, and I've not read any of the books in this series yet, but I feel like I need to get around to it and read it eventually. I believe this series is meant to be companion books and not necessarily books that you have to read in order, but whenever I have a sequel book or a book that is not book 1 on this list, I try not to read very much of the description because I don't want to be giving away anything. Dinosaurs and Portals, and a Girl Who Can Find Both in the latest book in the Hugo and Nebula award-winning series. Antsy is the latest student to pass through the doors at Eleanor West's School for Wayward Children. The next book on my list is The 5 Impossible Tasks of Aidan Smith. This is also a middle grade book, but it sounds very intriguing and fun. When Aidan Smith moves into the beautiful and bizarre old mansion housing her grandfather, she discovers a strange society of elderly metalworkers whose mastery verges on magical. Deadly mechanical birds, a cavernous chamber full of dirty dishes, a highly dangerous game of Mechanist Bingo. Life at the Guild is not only strange, it's also dangerous. The next book on my list is The Slain Divine. This is the 3rd and final book in the Vagrant Gods trilogy, and I've not read anything in this trilogy so far, but now I can binge it. In the thrilling conclusion to USA Today's bestselling author David Dallish's new epic fantasy trilogy, a usurped prince must master the magic of shadows in order to reclaim his kingdom and his people. The next book is the only nonfiction book that I have on this list. I'm not very good at keeping up with nonfiction new releases, but this one caught my eye. It is called Remember My Story. The inspiring true story about how a modern teen girl and her Holocaust survivor friend fought against hate to create change. From strangers to friends to law-changing history makers, Claire and Alter's mission was always to remember this story. This page-turning memoir is a tribute to the man who survived the worst of humanity, an ode to friendship and community, and an empowering call to activism. Still on January 9th, we have another middle grade fantasy book. This is Lulu Sinagtala, which I don't know if I'm saying that correct, and the City of Noble Warriors. In this fast-paced, thrilling middle grade fantasy rooted in Tagalog mythology, a young Filipino girl discovers realms beyond her own, full of monsters and gods, a terrible evil who wants her magic, and even a talking duck. The next book is called Somewhere in the Deep. This is about underwater fantasy worlds. This one sounds intense and a little claustrophobic. I'm not sure if I'm up to it, but the cover is gorgeous. Crescent is determined to keep her head down and fulfill her role as a dutiful bodyguard, even though she is trapped underground with her childhood enemy and a company of people who would gladly kill her if they knew who her parents were. As they come across creatures she believed only existed in legends, it becomes clear that they are in far more danger than she could have imagined. But someone doesn't want her to make it out alive, and she'll have to figure out who it is before she's left alone in the dark. The next book is called You Dreamed of Empires. This is a historical fiction and also a translated work. This was published, I believe, in Spanish in 2022, and it is now being translated to English and published in January for the first time in the United States. I'm gonna really try to say these names correctly. Let me know if I get them wrong. Like, I'm really trying here, but let me know. I don't want to mispronounce them. I was like looking up how to say them and trying to repeat it, so I'm gonna do my best here. One morning in 1519, Conquistador Hernan Cortez entered the city of Tenochtitlan, today's modern-day Mexico City. Later that day, he would meet the Emperor Moctezuma in a collision of two worlds, two empires, two languages, and two possible futures. Finally, moving on to December 15th, this book is called The Griffin's Egg. This is one that I actually have the audiobook advanced reader copy of from NetGalley. I was approved for that, and I will be reading this one in January. This just sounds like a fun adventure fantasy. Lost in a wild West Virginia forest, Phoebe Gray's world is upended when she finds an irritable goblin named Nick Nash. She stumbled into Lurch Hollow, a place of magic and mystery where trolls lurk in the shadows and mermaids sway with the tide. And on January 16th, we have a book called Tusks of Extinction. This is a sci-fi novella, and this is another one that I have the ebook copy of, the advanced reader copy. So I will be reading this one and reviewing it in January. When you bring back a long extinct species, there's more to success than DNA. Moscow has resurrected the mammoth, but someone has to teach them how to be mammoths, or they are doomed to die out again. The late Dr. Demira, the world's foremost expert in elephant behavior, is called in to help. While she was murdered a year ago, her digital consciousness is uploaded into the brains of the mammoth. I'm jumping in with a last-minute book that I missed whenever I very first recorded this. This is a young adult Rick Riordan Presents book, which I didn't know he was doing young adult ones, but the cover is gorgeous and the description looks really interesting, so I'm excited to read this one. 16-year-old Manisha is no stranger to monsters. She's been running from them for years, from beasts who roam the jungles to the king's army who forces people to scatter to the ends of the earth. You might think that the kingdom's famed holy temples atop the floating mountains, where Manisha is now a priestess, would be safe, but you would be wrong. Our next book is a YA historical retelling. It's a retelling of Jane Eyre. It is called Escaping Mr. Rochester. One of the reasons this book really intrigues me is because I like the story of Jane Eyre, but I'm not a huge fan of Mr. Rochester, so I'm really interested to see this take on the story. In this fresh reimagining of Charlotte Bronte's classic novel, Jane Eyre and Bertha Mason must save each other from the horrifying machinations of Mr. Rochester. And for our final book release in January, this one is called Pillars of Ash. This is the 4th book in a series. I believe this is also the conclusion to the series. So if you want to binge this series now, you can. As always, whenever it's a later book in the series, I'm not going to read quite as much of the description because I don't want to give anything away. A healer and daughter of the warrior priestess Hessa holds the balance of power in a world-shattering war of the gods, in this thrilling, mythical, and emotional epic fantasy saga. And there you have the 15 books that I am most excited for coming out in January. If this was helpful to you, leave a like or a comment and let me know what books you are excited to read in January. I hope to see you in another video, and happy reading.